Hello, we are almost at the end of the book. Look how much we've read so far. That's this side. And we've only got this amount left. So let's get cracking. Today's chapter is called Fishing in the Dark. The explorer hadn't moved by the time the sun rose. He lay snoring where they'd left him, a beetle perched on his chin. Max woke up first and kicked Fred in the crotch as he scrambled to his feet. Max scratched himself all over, then went running across a stone square, shook the explorer's shoulder and sat down on top of him. The explorer startled awake. Fred flinched, remembering what the man had said about his startle reflex, but he merely looked mildly, politely appalled. "Can I eat this?" Max asked. He thrust a handful of grass into the explorer's face. The explorer shifted Max onto the floor, sat up and began to plant the fire. "No, you can't," he said. "You don't even look." "The chances that the answer is yes are so slim." He looked up. "That's poisonous." "No." "Definitely poisonous, or maybe?" "Definitely." "And this?" He held up the explorer's chin beetle, which had fallen to the ground. "You could eat that," he said, the explorer. He gently took the beetle from him, but the Max of 2 hours from now would not thank you. As a rule of thumb, it's best not to eat things that are still moving. "But I'm hungry, and it's only moving a tiny bit." "I would still emphatically discourage it." "What does that mean?" "It means no." "Oh." Max lay down on his back. He didn't cry, but his face looked blank, and older than it should be. Quietly under his breath, he began to sing to himself in Portuguese. Fred scraped some dew from the leaves above him and used it to clean his face. He looked over at Max, properly looked, for the first time in days. The boy was growing thin, and his cheekbones stuck out under his eyes. Lila had worked hard to make him look careful and clean, but he had a snail trail of snot across his face and green dust in his eyebrows. The explorer was also looking down at Max. His face was shaping itself into a peculiar expression. His eyes were bright and his mouth was tight. Abruptly he rose to his feet. His voice was so brisk, artificially, unconvincingly brisk. "What are you still sitting about for? Time is precious. Shouldn't you be preparing for your journey?" "But how exactly? We don't know what to do," said Con. Her voice was almost a whine. Lila shot her a look. The explorer's expression was very dry. "If you have a preference for surviving, you'll need to know how to spear fish. There have been expeditions when the men and I survived on fish for half a year." Max's face lit up. "Fish? Right now?" "Tonight. There's a small lake not far from here." "But I'm hungry now," said Max. "It needs to be dark. You can make the day making spears." "I tried that," said Fred. He slapped away a mosquito. "But the vines I used to tie the flints on kept breaking off." "Vines?" The man looked shocked. "You don't use vines to secure a spear. That would be like using packing tape to build a steam train. Idiot boy, you use intestines. Where are the guts from your bird?" Claw pointed to the jungle where they'd buried the intestines and other ejected bits at a safe distance. "Dig them up, heat them on the fire, and use them as string." He made a winding gesture as if tying a knot. "And don't bother me until then." He turned abruptly, they were getting used to it now, and strode away towards the far end of the courtyard, towards the tangle of vines that cut off the corner of the square from sight. They dug out the intestines. They were not a pretty sight, and being buried hadn't improved them. Con washed them in a half coconut, and Lila and Fred began laying out the stones, trying not to look too hard at the semi-translucent tubes. Max tugged at Lila's ankle. "Lila, did you hear that?" "What?" The air was silent, bar the constant whir of the insects in the trees above them. Then Fred jerked his head round. It was the same roar they heard before, choking through the air. "It's coming from there, from behind the vines," he said. "I'm going to go and see." "No," said Con. "He said don't bother me, and I happen to think if a person wears claws for cufflinks, you should do what he says." "But what if he's being eaten?" said Fred. "Surely then it doesn't count." Lila shook her head. "I agree with Con." Con looked round in surprise. "Really?" "Whatever it is, he doesn't want us to know, and we can't afford to make him more angry." Lila turned with unexpected firmness towards the fire. "Let's make those spears." Reluctantly, Fred sat down. The morning was a sticky one, and no one smelt better by the end of it. The intestines weren't easy to empty, and the process of heating them over the fire to harden them felt unexpectedly medieval. "This is not how I pictured fishing," said Com. "I thought it was all old men sitting around on riverbanks telling people to be quiet, like river librarians." Fred opened his mouth to reply, but the guts dripped and spat hot fat at his teeth, so he shut it again. He wondered if his fingers would ever lose a faint scent of dead bird. By the time the sun began to set, he had a long-handled spear with a flint glinting into the light. Lila's spear was strong and straight, but the wrapping around the flint had gone awry, where Backer had decided to get involved in the process and covered himself in grease. Con's spear was the neatest. Her hands were competent and controlled, even with bird gut. Fred went in search of water to wash off the grease on his arms. Some of the stones had hollows that connected enough rainwater to wash a patch. He moved from stone to stone across the citadel, gradually shedding the worst of the burnt grease smell. As he came back, he heard voices. The explorer was knelt on the ground, bent over his pith helmet. Lila crouched next to him. "You have to be gentle with his knees and elbow joints," the explorer was speaking, his voice low. "They're still very fragile at this age." Lila nodded. "I know." She reached into the pith helmet. "I can feel it when he moves. They're so light, like seagull bones." "Make sure you check under the armpits for parasites. There." Backer's head reared up over the edge of the pith helmet, and he let out a wail of protest. The explorer gave something approaching a smile. "He's being unnecessarily dramatic. The water's good for him. Now hold him by his forearms. Like this." Lila lifted Backer from the bath, dripping, his legs dangling. "Yes, check his stomach for ticks." Lila checked, brushing her fingers over the sloth's belly, her eyes squinting with care. "There's nothing." Backer's fur was plastered against his skull, and his eyes were wide with the affront of it. He gave out a squawk as he hung from Lila's hands. "Now you need to dry him." Swiftly, Lila unplaited her hair. It fell in an uneven wave to her waist. She lifted the sloth onto it and rubbed him gently. Backer snuffled among the deep brown curls. Fred saw Con inside the stone room give a ghost of a smile. Max was half asleep, his head on Con's lap. The explorer raised his eyebrows. The corner of his mouth lifted half an inch. I doubt that particular practice would be suggested in veterinary college, but good. The sun was dipping over the top of the statue of the panther. The explorer looked up and saw Fred watching. He sprang to his feet, as if embarrassed to be caught mid-kindness, his bad leg catching on his good one, suddenly brisk again. "Right, are you ready to go? You each need to take some fire with you. The fish eyes shine red in the light. Find slow-burning wood, something dense, or it'll burn down too quickly." They set off in single file through the dark trees, each carrying a burning branch. Backer rode, still slightly damp inside Lila's shirt. The explorer moved without a single rustle, the rest stumbling behind him, stubbing their toes on the unseen roots. A branch whipped in Fred's face, and the leaves blackened in the flame of his torch, but the wood was too green to catch fire. "Don't burn the jungle down, please," said the explorer, without turning round. Fred found to his surprise that the dark no longer seemed threatening. It made his skin tingle, but the pitch-black shadows under the trees no longer bit his stomach in the same way. The change had been so slow he hadn't felt it come. "There are ant mounds everywhere here," said the explorer. "Nothing too bad. The only dangerous ants are the bullet ants, but you don't want to disturb them if you can help it. I was attacked by a colony once when I was asleep. It looked like my whole body was covered in warts." "Oh, wow," said Lila. "Quite. Not good for morale." They went in a new direction, northwest, down a deep incline. Every time their branches burnt down to their hands, they pulled new ones from the tree and lit them. Twice Fred lost his footing and slid until he came up against a tree. Max tripped, ate a mouthful of mud, and then they had to pause until his screaming died down long enough for him to walk on. Lila tried to comfort him. The explorer turned away and studied a dung beetle with an angry intensity. The lake, when they came upon it, was larger than Fred had expected. The trees that grew all around it had spread their roots under water. The explorer took off his shoes and waded in, knee-deep. "Come in quickly," he said. "What are you waiting for?" Fred followed him into the water, feeling it soak his shorts and praying there would be nothing in it with teeth. The lake was pure black, except where his burning torch cast a yellow light down through the water to the mud and the stones of the lake bed. In the glow of the flames, pairs of red lights flitted and flashed under the surface of the water. Max laughed, delighted. "The bigger the eyes," said the explorer, "the bigger the fish. Move slowly towards them. Hold your torch close to the surface. You lower your spear as slowly as you can into the water, and then at the last moment you jab. Jab fast, don't jab your feet. Now split up." Lila and Con exchanged sceptical glances. They moved off across the lake, but they didn't split up. Their breath was audible. It was hard to tell in the dark, but Fred thought they might have been holding hands. Lila reached out and took Fred's hand. His palm was warm and sticky. "Let's fish," said Max. Fred fumbled, trying to arrange his spear properly while keeping the flame away from his face. "If I give you the torch to hold," he said to Max, "will you try not to burn my hair with it?" Max took the burning branch. "Maybe," he said. The spearing was harder than Fred had expected. The spear was thin and supple in his hand, but every time he brought it down over a fish, the fish had gone. A swarm of mosquitoes passed over them. Max sneezed and waved his burning branch over emphatically. "Max, I think I'd better take the branch." "No!" cried Max. No, it's mine. I'll be careful." The spear suddenly flew past them, inches from Fred's chest, and landed in the middle of the lake, its tip vibrating out of the water. Fred jumped. Max gave a yell, rocked backwards, grabbed at Fred's knees, and the two of them toppled backwards into the shallows. The branch extinguished itself. Fred sat up, spitting water, and looked around for Max. The explorer strode past, picked Max up with one hand, flipped him upright, and set him down on his feet. "Are you all right?" Fred asked Max. "I'm wet. I don't want to be wet." "But otherwise?" Max's face rippled as he debated whether or not to cry. He hesitated then. "My underpants are soggy, but I'm all right." The explorer picked the spear out of the mud from where he'd thrown it. "Good boy," he said to Max. On the end of the spear was a fish as big as a man's thigh. "Breakfast," said the explorer. "Come here, Fred, and learn how it works. Max, stay on the shore and guard the fish. Here, I'll give you a torch." The explorer strode through the water to the nearest tree, pulled down a branch, lit it with its own, and handed it to Max. "Beautiful, no?" "Should Max be left with fire?" asked Fred. "He tends to eat things." The explorer turned to Max. "Boy, do not eat the fire or any other part of the world surrounding you. Do you understand?" "Yes," said Max. He was sniffing the fish. "You see, he understands," said the explorer. "Come on." Fred wrung the water out of his shirt and waded into the lake to stand near the explorer. The man seemed to be in a good mood. Fred risked a question. "When you go out into the trees?" "Yes." The explorer waded further in, the water lapping up to his thighs. Fred followed. The black water closed over his chest. "What are you doing there? You're gone all day, but you don't come back with food. Are you hunting?" For a long time, the explorer didn't answer. Instead, he stared down at the lake. He was so still that Fred wasn't sure if he was breathing. "There, see?" He pointed down at the murky water and the submerged roots. Fred could see nothing, only floating leaves and the moon. The explorer's arm moved so fast that Fred didn't see it start or stop, but suddenly there was a long, thin fish flapping at the end of his spear. "Needle jaw," he said. "Tastes like pike, lots of bones, but delicious." He took a length of twine from his pocket. It had a thin splint, sharp as a needle, tied to the end. He threaded the fish onto the twine. "You asked what I do during the day," he said. "I'm fixing the thing I broke." Then he pivoted on his heel, swept the subject away with a gesture. "Look, see how I grip it? Get the spear less than a thumb's height above the fish before you stab down." Fred hunched over the water. Red eyes glinted in the dark. He stabbed many rocks, some leaves, and his own ankle. Then, astonishingly, he felt the tip hit a fish. The first stab hit only the tail fin, but the fish was slowed and Fred stabbed again, frantically until he felt the flint meet flesh. "I think I caught something!" He held his spear up to the light. On the end, something wiggled. It wasn't large, but it was indisputably a fish. Wolffish. They call it a trera in these parts. Put it in your pocket, said the explorer. Fred checked to see if he was serious, but he didn't seem particularly jovial. So Fred put the fish into the pocket of his shorts. It stared up at him like a gym mistress. He waited for a moment, rinsing the fish blood off his hands before he dared to try again. What are you fixing? The explorer waded deeper into the lake, up to his waist. He seemed to find it easier to speak here in the dark. I was on a reconnaissance mission. I was flying, looking for signs of life below. I was circling the city, trying to find out whether there was anything to see, and my wretched engine failed. I crashed through the canopy. There was a fire, and it killed a lot of the foliage. What happened to the plane? Could you salvage it? The man's eyes flicked down to the water, and he stirred his spear in the weeds. Fred tried again. Is that what made the hole in the trees? In the canopy? Yes. But the canopy that was there for a reason. Whoever built this city had planted the trees so their leaves interlock, and you can't see the city from above. You can stand on the mountain top and look down, and all you'd see is uninterrupted green. How long ago was it made? I don't know. With a city so entwined with the jungle around it, it's hard to be certain about a date. 100 years, probably several hundred more. It would take at least 50 to 100 years for those trees to grow again. I've cut down the burnt trees where I can and tried to replant in the same place. I saw there are new shoots down the middle of the square. Precisely, but as you can imagine, cutting down a tree without a saw is not a relaxing pastime. It's taken time. Until the trees grow, I need to fix a canopy. I'm building a dust sheet of sorts, of palm leaves and vines to cover up the gaps I made, an invisibility cloak. Is that what you do when you leave during the day? Exactly. It's slowish work, he stabbed, brought up a fish, and threaded it onto the twine. The firelight cast the cuts and scars on his hands up into sharp relief. I'm erecting new portions every month or so. I've fallen out of the trees more than is ideal, but it will be completely green roof, a living protection for the ruins. But protection from what? From people surveying the land from the air, from the people looking for El Dorado, from people looking to pack places like this into parcels of stones and sell it on to curious ladies and gentlemen in Chelsea for the price of a bus driver's yearly wages, from people exactly like me. Like you, but you're saving it. No, I'm undoing my own harm, but God knows what I might have done when I was younger. I was hungry to have my name in black capitals on the front page of the Times. He glanced sideways at Fred, who shifted uncomfortably and looked very hard at the water. The explorer stabbed again. This fish was still writhing hard, and he had to smack it against the sole of his shoe to kill it. Perhaps it was this that made him flush red in the firelight. Europeans have said cities like this were impossible. Europeans never believed a place like this. They believed the jungle could never have supported such numbers. They said it was too infertile and called it a counterfeit paradise. He paused, staring unseeingly at the fish on the string. The tribes the Europeans met were so small that people believed there had never been great sweeping cities. They didn't realise that the tribes they met on the river were so small precisely because they were more readily found, like people like me, because of European diseases were killing so many of them. Measles, influenza, God knows, I've seen enough of that. This place doesn't need more people like me. A deep red anger spread down his neck to his arms. Fred didn't move. He only listened, harder than he'd ever listened to anything in his life. My wife was born in a village in the jungle. We were young, barely 20. She breathed the jungle, wore the jungle. She died from measles soon after our boy was born. His voice was flat. She caught it from a troop of Englishmen, amateur explorers. And your son? What happened to your son? He would have turned 4 the week he died. Cholera. The explorer stared at the dark. This land could have supported millions of lives. And one day the world will know that. The time will come, I hope, when the world values people as much as it values land. But for now, we don't need more men in pith helmets marching through the jungle towards us. He looked down at the path they had walked. Neither the people who passed through the city nor the city itself would be safe. Fred's blood was moving faster than usual through his body. He wanted to speak, to say something that would stop the explorer looking so fierce and so lost, but his voice wouldn't come. Which is why the man stabbed again at the opaque water, but this time he missed. And there was a shake of passion in his hand. I ask again that you swear not to tell anyone about this place. I ask it with every ounce of my heart. Fred was glad it was dark, glad he couldn't see the explorer's face, nor the explorer his. I swear I won't, he thought. How can you make someone see that you're not lying, that you mean it? I swear I'll never tell, he said, louder. I swear. The explorer bowed his head. Thank you, Fred. I didn't understand before. I thought it was simple. Extraordinary things are rarely simple. But if you're right about what would happen, if you're sure, I would never dare say I was sure, but I believe I am right. I believe it enough to swear by it. Then I swear too. The explorer gave a sigh, and the sound of things that Fred could not untangle. Thank you. I'll die before I tell, said Fred. I'll explain it to the others. I'll never say a single thing about you. Me neither, said a voice. You're my explorer. I don't like to share. Fred jumped. Max had paddled back into the lake, still holding the torch, and was standing directly behind the explorer, rib deep in water, preparing to hug his knee from behind. The explorer reared away, startled by the boy's hands. Good God, it is best not to show affection when you're holding a naked flame, child, he said gruffly, but ruffled Max's hair. Max giggled and waded through the shallows towards Lila and Con, singing a song whose lyrics seemed to be comprised entirely of the word fish. The explorer handed Fred his spear. Here, try with mine, it's lighter. What will you use? I, technically, don't need a spear. He crouched low, chest deep in the water, lowered his hands up to his elbows. One hand flashed through the water. There was a certain amount of thrashing, then the explorer held up a fish the size of his forearm, clasped in both hands. Its scales shone in the moonlight. The only downside of doing it like this, he said, is sometimes they turn out to be piranha, and that can be awkward. Fred thought of his father, back home, wrapped tightly in his pinstripe days. I wish you were my father, he muttered, so quietly that the explorer could choose not to hear. The explorer turned, his eyebrows high. I would not wish that. I didn't excel at that job, he said sharply. And Fred, it's possible your father will surprise you. It's in their nature of fathers. They're not as predictable as they seem. He is, said Fred. He stopped, but the darkness made it easier to speak. I wanted to tell him about this place. I thought he'd be proud. I'm sure your father is very proud of you, said the explorer. He was looking down at the water, half listening. No, he isn't. Fred glared at the man's back. It's simple. He'd rather my mother had never had me. Then she wouldn't have... It's not simple, Fred. The explorer turned and looked him full in the face. You must stop saying that. Cut it out of your vocabulary. The complexity of it all is endless. Nothing in life is simple. Fred sighed. He was disappointed in the explorer. Adults always say that. It remains true. The world is larger than the human imagination. How could it ever be simple? He ducked under water, his body disappearing under the black surface, and came up holding in his fist something resembling an eel, which thrashed against his chest. He went on as if nothing happened. A man can love and fear the responsibility that comes with love, a secret that can at once be selfish and necessary. For God's sake, boy, truth is as thorny and various as the jungle itself. He turned to crouch in the water again. Then, suddenly, he froze. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Max, Fred, quick, out of the water. Con, Lila, get out of the water. Fred twisted to look around. Why? Out! Con and Lila started wading towards him. What's happening? Move faster! The explorer sprinted through the shadows, his bad leg dragging behind him. He grabbed Max around the waist, knocked Max's torch into the water, and strode in vast uneven steps towards the bank. Fred ran after them, tripping over the submerged roots. Lila pulled Con along through the mud. The explorer dropped Max onto the ground. He landed head first, but Lila scooped him into her arms before he could start screaming. The explorer turned, spear raised, to face the lake. What's wrong? What do we do? Asked Con. Nothing. Now the children were out of the water, he sounded entirely placid. We're leaving. What is it, though? See those eyes? They shine red like the fish. There, at the other side of the lake. Lila swallowed. Is that what I think it is? Her eyes must have been sharp. Fred could only see a flash of grey and red. A caiman, said the explorer. It's probably an old one, maybe 8 foot long. Probably not interested in any of you, but... He didn't finish the sentence. Have you ever been bitten? Asked Con. A few times. Come. We might as well leave rather fast. He tossed Max into the air, grabbed hold of one of his ankles and threw him over the shoulder. Follow me, you 3. Put your feet where I put mine. Max, hanging over the man's back, foraged in his pockets. Fred, whispered Max from upside down. I have to tell you something. What is it? I ate a tiny bite of the explorer's fish. While I was waiting, I was hungry. He held out the fish, which had his finger marks pressed into it. Is that all right? Fred looked at the creases in Max's anxious face. Yes, he said. He tried to sound as serious as he could. I wouldn't do it again, but people do eat raw fish. I don't think you need to panic. I won't die. No. In fact, I think maybe, in a very peculiar kind of way, we're all safe. For now. The explorer twisted round to look at Fred, almost smacking Max's head against a tree. Yes, you're safe, he said. Or rather, he clarified, you can still die out here, but if you pay attention, you'll be safe from a lot of things. He stopped, turning back to look at the file of children behind him. Moonlight, sweat-smeared. Moonlit. Okay. He shook his head. There is no way to say such things as need to be said without sounding like a cheerleader. He did not, Fred thought, look very much like a cheerleader. Cheerleaders, he believed, wore far fewer animal teeth. Do you see all of this? The explorer held his torch high, casting light onto the trees and the sleeping birds. You don't have to be in a jungle to be an explorer, he said. Every human on this planet is an explorer. Exploring is nothing more than the art of paying attention, writ large, attention. That's what the world asks of you. If you pay ferocious attention to the world, you'll be as safe as it's possible to be. He glared at them each in turn. For once, Fred didn't flinch under the ferocity of his gaze. Speaking of attention, Lila, the explorer said, your sloth is trying to eat your hair. It will give it indigestion if it succeeds. He walked on, Max's thin ribs bouncing against his spine, carrying him home. Just see how long the next chapter. We'll do it very quickly because that was a really long chapter. The vow. No one wanted to sleep that night. They sat over the fire cooking the fish until it spat and sizzled. Fred explained to Lila and Con about the canopy and the man working every day to protect the great green secret at the heart of the jungle. We should do something, said Con, to prove to him we won't tell. Do you think he doesn't believe us? Asked Lila. Bacca lay snoring in her lap, with Max curled up on her foot, his eye closed. It's not that exactly, but I don't think he's the easily believing kind, said Con. I like that idea, said Fred. What could we do? We could swear, said Lila. We can make a blood vow like they do in books. I want something more permanent than that, said Con. She looked up at the roof, through which the stars shone, silver woven through green. I want something bigger, something that will make this all last forever. I know! Lila sat up straighter, jerking back her weight. We can make a mark, like a tattoo. We don't have any ink, said Fred. But the explorer does, said Con. I saw it when I was collecting wood. He said he keeps his most precious things where he doesn't want stolen, under the hammock where he sleeps. There was a pause. Then Fred said, if he doesn't want them stolen, I don't know if I'd want to try stealing them. He sleeps with a knife. Excitement seemed to have made Con bold. I'll do it. Even Bacca looked surprised. Con, are you crazy? Said Lila. But she was already up and running across the square on her tiptoes, half bent over and muttering warnings to herself as she went. Lila and Fred exchanged startled glances. Con returned 5 minutes later, bearing the ink aloft. I did it, she said. You stole it, said Lila, her voice full of admiration. Yes, said Con, flushed with the victory in the light of the fire. Then, sort of. Sort of, said Fred. He was awake. He sort of said we could borrow it. He said it's precious, and if we spill it, he'll put snakes in my hair. But I would have stolen it if I had to. Fred grinned. What should we tattoo then? We could write, I swear, asked Lila. Too complicated. It would give us too many chances to go wrong, said Con. Or an X, said Lila, like the one on the map. I like that, Con nodded. She sharpened the tip of a penknife with a flint, and Lila burned the tip into the flames of the fire to sterilise it. Who wants to go first? Lila asked. There was silence, a silence sharpened by the knife in Lila's hand. I'll do it, said Fred. He tried not to let his hands shake. It was harder than he had expected to cut his own skin. He dug down, wincing sharply, and cut a thin slice into the base of his palm, where his thumb met his palm. Does it hurt? Asked Con anxiously. A bit, said Fred. His voice was coming out tight, but not compared to everything else. He added a second line and dabbed away the blood. How do you think they put in the ink? I think they just drip it on, said Lila. The ink stung, and Fred bit his teeth together, but Con and Lila were both tactfully looking away. There, he said. He held it up to the firelight, a small X, marked in ink and blood. Lila went next. She winced when the ink was added, but said nothing. Con took longer over hers, making sure the lines of the X were perfectly straight. If it's going to be forever, she said, I don't want it to be wonky. Max suddenly jerked upright. I want one, he said. Max, I thought you were asleep, said Lila. I was pretending. Shh, Maxie, go to sleep. I want one. I want to do the secret swear. No, said Lila, absolutely not. It hurts and you'll cry and the explorer will wake up. And anyway, Mama and Papa would kill me. I won't cry. You would, said Con. But it's my secret too. If you want me to keep a secret, you have to let me. The others looked at each other. Lila sighed. Max did cry, but he tried very hard not to. Lila took the knife and Max screwed up his eyes and bit his lips together and drummed his feet on the ground. And though the tears were trickling down his face as Lila added the ink to his hand, he didn't yell. Shall we swear? Said Con. What shall we say? You do it, Fred. You're the oldest. Fred grinned, half embarrassed. We swear, he began. Just a second. Con threw an armful of kindling on the fire, and it roared upwards towards the sky. Okay, go. We swear to keep this place a secret, said Fred, until it's safe to tell the world about it, or until we die, whichever comes first. I swear, said Con solemnly. Then, though statistically we're more likely to die before we get a chance to tell anyone, you know. But she was smiling. I swear, said Lila. Always. Swear, echoed Max. It's my city. No one gets to share it with us. Con looked at Lila and Lila looked at Fred. The three of them grinned over Max's head. Oh, that rhymes. Okay, our next chapter will be called Explorer School and we will be reading that tomorrow. Exciting. Right, that is it for today and I shall see you all tomorrow.